when I was a little kid and I thought of God, the image that came up to me was Gollum.
Like
so
the Lord of
so
the Rings the creature.
yes. I don't know why. That was just an association I had in my mind when I was like really, really young. Because I love Lord of the Rings. But so I
Like this weird cave creature. I love that.
because I couldn't like think of I just didn't think of him as like I guess an old man. So I was like, well, he's not a human, is he? So he's like something else. And like,
Today, my guest is Matthew Hazelwood, a young gentleman studying philosophy, and I found I resonated with him a lot with regards to our perspectives on the individual versus the collective, but on a more personal level too, like our anxieties and frustrations with social norms and situations. So I invited him on. And as you might expect, given his field of study, he's a very thoughtful person. And he's trying to tread a difficult line between embracing intellectualism and questioning its value, since he is an inveterate questioner, as you'll find out. And he's a very sharp guy, and it's really fun to have him on. And if you don't like the conversation, you're a Nazi.
I mean, I'm honored if you would consider me a philosopher. I guess I call myself a YouTuber and a podcaster and a student, but philosopher sounds more cool.
I remember hearing somewhere that like the reason they chose the term philosopher is because it was specifically going against the self-aggrandizement of a word like sage
Hmm.
or something like, or like a wise person. So it's like, well, I'm not a wise person. I just love wisdom. So it kind of like disavows any sort of uh, claim to wisdom. You know what I mean? Is that true?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I guess I sort of hold philosophers in such high esteem that um, it's hard for me to well, I don't know. I mean, there's like a couple ways to think about, I guess, the concept of philosopher in the first place. I mean, in one sense, we're all philosophers, right? Because we all face death, we all face love, we all face loss, we all face these like just universal concerns and problems that we have to deal with. And so, our lives day by day are like our philosophy in action. But then there's like people who, we either call philosophers or they call themselves philosophers who like you know, think very deeply about these issues in a way that maybe the average person isn't able or willing to. Um, of course, an academic philosopher is like a very recent phenomenon historically. It wasn't until like the 18th century when you got someone like Kant or Hegel, um, where actual people teaching the subject. Um, but still, there was a distinction between, I guess, a layperson and a philosopher. Um, insofar as the philosophers were thinking in a way that maybe doesn't come naturally to some people, or I don't know. Philosophers are weirdos. That's really all it boils down to, in my opinion. We're just people who uh, uh, aren't satisfied with the way things are. And so we have to like rationalize these things to ourselves about why they are or could they be any different. Um, so yeah.
Okay. And I mean, so the title of the episode that I thought of was The Joyful Loner, because I was compelled by your dilemma that you talked about in chat, where you said that um, it's part of your nature to be um, kind of averse to groups, and that like your actions, like your philosophy put into practice, is very individualistic, but you that doesn't sound like it it sits very well with you sometimes. And I mean, I totally relate to that. Like, um, the the times when I'm sometimes happiest is when I'm buried in a book or something. But then some of that happiness is just the excitement of being able to engage with the world in a fuller, more interesting way, right? So it's almost like the promise of a collective, right? Even though the activity itself is very isolated. So I wonder, like, is it possible to live a rich, fulfilling life in that isolation, or in that loneliness? Although loneliness suggests that the solitude is a painful experience. I don't know if you have any thoughts. Like, that's just an introduction. I know there's a lot there to unpack.
So, I mean, going back maybe to the concept of philosopher for a second, I do sort of think philosophy is, I think I mentioned this to you in chat, but philosophy is individualistic by nature. Um, and I mean, that, which is not to say that there haven't been philosophers who have defended collectivism, but I think the process of philosophy, or like doing philosophy in a lot of ways, is a very individualistic endeavor, because um, even if you're like responding to other thinkers and like publishing papers, writing books, going to conferences, you know, most of the work is by yourself, you know, being by yourself, thinking, reading, writing, trying to evaluate, you know, your particular perspective on the world. Um, so that kind of separates philosophers from other people. Once again, um, but I guess for me, um, I don't know. I've always felt sort of a certain degree of distance between myself and other people, and I don't know if that it might be partly related to my like philosophical turn of mind, but I think it might be something else as well. Um, you know, just take small talk, for example. I mean, small talk is sort of one of those necessary things in life. You know, you can't have a necessarily high level conversation with every single person you interact with on a daily basis. You would never get anything done. If you're going to the grocery store and you're buying your groceries, it's like if you start talking about um, the critique of pure reason, probably, you know, the people behind you are going to get mad at you, or it's just, it's going to put your life on hold. So you have to like, hi, you have to say like, hi, how you doing? You know, nice weather, yada, yada. Um, Again, partly, I guess, for efficiency's sake, partly because I think people are sort of almost afraid of each other, afraid of intimacy, afraid of those deep dives, afraid of being vulnerable. Um, and like, I remember being a teenager. As I get older, I guess I appreciate small talk a little more. But as a teenager, I was like, oh, I hate small talk. Small talk is such a waste of time. Why am I doing this? I hate it. I'm not good at it. Um, so a lot of social life, I just sort of feel can be superficial. Um, a lot of parties and meetings at work, and you know, various or meetings at school. It seems all very like um, uh, useless, I guess, to be polemical about it. And you know, what I like about philosophy is the attempt to get at the useful, the attempt to get at ultimate, or the attempt to get at uh the what we should really care about, or what is really true or just, or the kind of life we should lead. It's really like pulling the curtain on everyday life, seeing the wizard behind the curtain. um I don't know if that's a really good answer to your question, but
It is. I mean, I wrote down a few notes that I want to like develop a little bit. Sorry, I was just looking to center the image on screen. But um, so, for example, you talk about how you feel that it's not um, something useful, for example, to do small talk. Like, you're not really digging into like what it means to be human, etc. But what I found interesting is that, like, on a couple of occasions, I can think of listening to an interview with a philosopher, like a professional philosopher who teaches at a school. I was surprised that they give their answer um, in a sort of like hedonistic approach to philosophy, in the sense that like they portrayed it as something that's just done for the fun of it, just like for the fun of thinking. Um, and like I could see how that's a really cool way to think about it, right? It's like, well, there's all these different ideas. We're never really going to get closure on any of them. And it's just like, adults kind of like playing with ideas. Although, from a personal point of view, it doesn't really feel like that a lot of the times. Like, it feels like these are burning questions that I need to get further into, that I need to get a better understanding of, right? Like, I wonder if your teachers in school like give you an explanation of like, okay, you're here to study philosophy because da 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 da. Like, do they ever make it so explicit, or is it just understood? You're here because you need a degree. Is it something that's very practically oriented, or?
My professors really haven't uh like pretty much, well, really any of my professors, but I'll focus on the philosophy ones for now since I'm a philosophy major. Um, they haven't really said like this is why you do philosophy. It's X or Y. They just but you can tell they just have such a passion for the subject that they just care about it so much. They want to talk about it. They want you they want to hear your thoughts on it. They want to get discussions going. Um, that I guess and this is the great thing about teachers, right? I mean, we've all had those teachers that they made us want to know something. They made us want to study a subject just because they were so enthusiastic about it, that it rubbed off on us. Um, but that would be very interesting. That would be an interesting question for me to ask my professors. Go to their office hours and say like, okay, why do philosophy? Um,
Sell me on this. Yeah.
It's sort of, I guess, a question philosophers have been asking for since the beginning of philosophy. Um, I don't know. I mean, I've also said before that like that I feel like a kid playing with toys. So because you mentioned the hedonistic approach to philosophy, it's like I've felt that myself. Like, oh, I enjoy you know talking about this obscure philosopher from the 1860s and playing with his, taking his arguments to their logical conclusion and or seeing the contradictions, and it's just sort of a pleasure I get in the same way that I get pleasure from reading a great novel. Um, but I don't know. I guess I'm sort of two minds on the matter. I mean, I don't think I get a pleasure out of it, and I don't necessarily expect to change the world by my opinion of um, Marx, for example. But at the same time, I still think it's like philosophy is the most important subject that you could study. And I think I would stand by that if anyone challenged it.
Well, like I mean, that resonates with me. I was working on something, looking at Aristotle's views on slavery, and I mean, in some ways, he's pretty blunt about the fact that it's a huge privilege to be able to do philosophy, right? Like, some people just don't have the time or resources. I mean, I guess it's tricky to say like what those resources need to be, but for example, you mentioned as like a, as a common experience, right? Like going to the grocery store, and then there's like this horribly forced small talk where the cashier asks you, "How are you?" and you respond, "Fine. How are you?" Right? Like, you might as well just sing in Chinese. It doesn't matter what you're saying, right? It's just you have to say something, right? And it can be like kind of grueling, right? Because you're not connecting with anybody. Like, they might as well just be a robot. And I share your frustration there in a way, but then it's like you said, you need predictability, right? You want efficiency, and the sad thing is that people are kind of tools, right? That like function in an economic system, and to be able to kind of soar above that and just look at life through the lens of ideas and perception and just like the pleasure of thought, right? Of having everything you need otherwise, right? Like, you have a place to stay, you have food, etc. Then you're like, well, what else am I going to do? Right? Just like have fun with ideas. And so like, that's how I kind of see the appeal of Nietzsche. because like he doesn't um I mean, I want to say like he doesn't say like I am Nietzsche, this is what I believe and it is correct philosophically. I mean, he does kind of do that, but there's also like it's so much fun to think and to put your thoughts into words, right? Even though like he challenges the very idea sometimes, right? Like, you know, what can we actually do with words? But it's like the pleasure of that. Um, but I want to ask you about, you know, you mentioned this thing of like how that lack of connection, like speaks to like people's fear of intimacy and their vulnerability. And like I remember in school, I felt like terrified to be in lecture and like raise my hand and like contribute. I don't I feel like there isn't really a cultivation of vulnerability as a student. Like it's you're so like brutally ranked, right? It's like one person above another. So it's like any sign of weakness can be really detrimental to your career. I don't know if you found that or if you sympathize with that.
I think I sympathize with the I think I sympathize with that to some degree. I mean, I guess I'm not so much worried about like, or my anxiety, say, um, doesn't necessarily come from I'm worried like one slip up in class is going to ruin my career. But I think it's natural for people to like fear judgment, fear like shame is like very like poisonous emotion. If you do something that other people dislike, you feel shame. It's very heart wrenching. Um, and actually, I found funny enough that maybe this is because I go to a small private liberal arts university, but like university feels a lot like high school. It doesn't feel that much like the I think the talking point is sort of like well, high school's terrible, but then you go to college and there's so much more freedom and acceptance, and um it's so much better. And it is, I mean, it is better in very specific ways, but at the same time there's still a lot of that like clickiness, a lot of that um uh faux friendliness, a lot of that gossiping. Um, and I don't know that this might just be like humans, right? This might just be kind of people have these like weird social behaviors that can cause us pain, but we just sort of have to put up with them or deal with them as best we can. It might not be something we can get away from. Um, but actually, I want to go back, if I may, to the small talk point for a second, um, because uh, like I said, I mean, small talk is like necessary. Um, so there's and just and like there's a I don't know if how much time you spend on the internet, but there's the popular meme nowadays of, well, we live in a society, right? That's the joke now. But if you think about it, like I wouldn't say necessarily like communities are artificial. I wouldn't say like if that's our definition of society. I guess society is not artificial, but we could say society is artificial um, if we mean something else. If we mean like all these like social all these like things like small talk, all these like social cues and mannerisms you have to follow, these social graces, holding a door for people, um, uh, a lot of that, a lot of the learned behaviors we acquire as children, a lot of that is artificial. We could even say a lot of that is an illusion, um, but it might be like a necessary illusion. It might be like in order for us to get on with our lives, or in order for us to like do philosophy or to study the universe, um, we have to like put up with people's nonsense, and we have to like be friendly sometimes when we don't want to be, and we have to sort of repress certain emotions, or at least suppress certain emotions. Like this is Sigmund Freud's point in his work, civilization and its discontents. He's basically saying like civilization is inherently neurotic. Civilization is put in place to prevent you from doing things. And so that puts the individual always in tension with society. Um, Now that it might be that like it depends on like it's probably a sliding scale that if you're in Stalinist Russia, the neurosis is far more um, uh, dangerous and apparent. Whereas if we're in if you live in the United States in 2022, the neurosis is a little more um, uh, under the surface. It's a little more hidden behind other things. Um, so that's sort of like I guess the place I'm stuck with, because nowadays not to get too political, but nowadays like we're all sort of like trying to figure out the world we want to live in, and we want to like I think it's like two like conflicting desires in people. Like people sort of want to change the world, want to make the world a better place, but we feel like, oh, the universe or the world is inherently flawed and we're stuck and it's hopeless, and so we just have to, uh, uh, live it out. We can't do anything, um, and so it's like I don't know. I guess what like I'm pulled in different directions, right? I mean, I don't expect utopia. You mean like utopia literally comes from the Greek meaning no place, which I think is hilarious. um so I don't expect like perfection. In fact, I expect imperfection. I expect problems. I expect bureaucratic holdups. I expect governments to do terrible things. But at the same time, like I still think we can be active and participate and make positive change in certain directions in certain ways. Um, that's a bit of a tangent, but
No, like I mean, I think it fits. Like, yeah, I really like what you said about. I mean, I'm very much um, impressed by Freud's analysis. I mean, I know he gets a bad rap about how idiosyncratic some of his ideas are, but I think that was part of his project of just like trying to analyze the human mind. And of course, he's gonna end up, maybe saying something's wrong. But like, I think that insight about, excuse me, civilization as being like functionally a repressive tool, I find like so interesting because, um, you know, there's this part I think in Genealogy or the Antichrist where Nietzsche talks about how difficult it is to get at the truth of people's lives because you can't really publish everything that happens to you or everything you think, just because like that might be like misinterpreted or it'll just like cause chaos or it's some stuff you just have to keep to yourself, right? And I find it interesting how if you look at it that way and you think that there's necessary illusions and there's like all these necessary masks and stops and cloaks over things, then being able to read philosophy, especially someone as bold as Nietzsche, is to finally get at like the real thing, which is to me is like quite thrilling, right? To have someone really lay it bare, like for example, I thought a lot about how Nietzsche just like called Socrates ugly. Like that's such a crude thing to do, right? Even though, I'm sure there's a lot of philosophers who, immediately judge someone based on their appearance, like, oh, this guy looks like an idiot or something, right? But they would never say that because it would, torpedo their reputation, especially if they did it, as like, this is my book and I'm publishing it. And I mean, at least I read some of Nietzsche's experiments in doing that kind of thing as an attempt to incorporate like the truth of his ugliness, kind of. And yeah, like, you mentioned all these like artificial constructions that help things function. yeah, like I wonder how you deal with that like schizophrenic existence of, like being someone who's professionally dedicated to, let's say, the truth or something, and then your day-to-day life is one of like masking and artificiality and superficiality. um like, I mean, I guess you did mention attention. Yeah, maybe you could elaborate on that.
That's a good segue actually, because before coming on, I listened to, I think it might have been your first episode where you talk about going to church.
Mm.
And I took a few notes on that episode. Because I think like, I guess my relationship with um religion, or like narrative and symbolism and poetry more generally is like a good encapsulation of the struggle, and my attempt at answering that struggle. Because so I wasn't raised religious, like some atheists. I think they became atheists because they felt betrayed by their religion somehow. They were harmed psychologically, physically. They felt lied to. There was some like personal pain involved, and then they had to like escape that. I never had that like that really personal uh painful experience with a organized religion. I mean, we live in uh um or our ancestors, most of us were Christian, so we've this tradition's been handed down to us, and there's probably some trauma, some like secondhand trauma that we might experience from being the descendants of Christians. Um, um, but so yeah, so I like, but I became interested in religion like around middle school because I was taking I think it was like my social studies class. We were doing like a comparative religion unit, and I was like hooked because I was so fascinated to learn like what people believe and why. Um, so then like that led me to like agnosticism. Um, and then I started reading some like new atheist work and started seeing some like atheist YouTubers, and I sort of thought, agnostics are kind of like the wimps of the of the debate, so I'm just gonna go to
You
atheism.
gotta pick a side.
Yeah. But I've also like been to in my teen years. I was living with my grandfather, and I was going to church with him sometimes. I was even like involved in the church choir for a little bit. Um, so I like to joke that for an atheist, I go to church a lot. I haven't been to church in, well, a couple years now. Um, but I sort of sometimes do find myself um, uh, envious of. Um, this is gonna get like any atheists who are watching this are gonna like throw tomatoes at me now, but um,
Right on.
I'm gonna I'm gonna say it anyway. Like sometimes I can appreciate, I guess, the religious person's experience, and sort of like almost uh, want to possess it myself. So there was I knew someone. She was my grandmother's best friend. And when my grandmother, my bio grandmother passed away, she sort of she took on the role of grandmother for me and called me her like adopted grandchild and whatnot. Um, and she was like one of the most kind-hearted, like really morally upright people like you'd ever known, you would ever meet. And she was like, she wasn't an evangelical Christian, but she was a deeply religious believer. But she didn't want to debate it, right? She wasn't interested in Christian apologetics. She wasn't interested in, the whether God existed or, the nature of the Trinity or whatnot. She just, um, she took it um, on belief. This is what I believe, and you know, this is how I live my life, and that's good enough for me. Um, and I can like, I really do admire that. It's almost like, why can't I have that? I feel like there's like a peace of mind there. There's like um, a degree of um, you're almost more grounded in a sense, if you have that attitude. But then it's like, then I come back to like John Stuart Mill, who was like Socrates. No, well, I'll say this metaphor, but I'm not trying to I'm not trying to insult Mrs. Butler when I say this. But when John Stuart Mill was like, a Socrates unhappy is worse than a is better than a pig happy. Um, now I'm not trying to say that Christians are pigs, but
Okay.
I I, I should have chosen my language more carefully. Now I feel bad, but I like I'm just not. What I mean is like I'm not capable of that, I guess, level of interacting with the world. I'm not capable of what Mrs. Butler was capable of, like just accepting it on faith and not worrying about it and just living her life. Like I'm the kind of person who like, no, I have to question everything 1,000 times over, before I commit to something. Um, and so that's why I can't believe. That's why I can't really be an effective religious person, or I can't be a genuine religious person, because if I take communion, I'm just like, well, why am I doing this? This is
Think
now,
it.
yeah. Now I feel like I've insulted my adopted grandmother, but because I don't, I'm really talking about it in a jovial spirit. I mean, I loved Mrs. Butler, and again, she was a great person, far more moral than I consider myself. Um, so then it's like I'm forced to ask myself, like, well, is it better to think less, or is it better to not be an intellectual than to be an intellectual? Is it better to sort of accept these societal illusions or these religious or political illusions and live your life on that basis, or is it better to see the wizard behind the curtain?
Mm.
um and I mean, for I guess to some degree it really wasn't my choice, right? Like I didn't choose to be the kind of person who questions everything. I'm just the kind of person who questions everything. And probably Mrs. Butler didn't choose to be um uh, uh just a kind-hearted, um genuine uh participant in society, um that didn't worry too much about, you know, ultimate truths. Um but it's like, who's getting the better who's getting the better or worse end of that bargain? I'm not so sure. Um but then it's like, but I also don't want to sound like the person who's like, oh, intellectuals are bad and evil and we should all be happy pigs. It's like, no, I'm not comfortable saying that, right? It's um the irreverent part of me is always breaking in when I'm like attempting to be that happy pig. Um so
But
I
but
don't
but
know.
then I wonder, if you were to be able to inhabit that woman's interior life, like if it would actually be similar. Because I had this experience once where I was in, um, it's like there's this Buddhist temple, and we were all sitting around in a circle after the sermon, just like discussing theory. And I forget what I said, but I was there because I felt really ill at ease with, my inability to figure things out. I just felt kind of like lost in this like haze of confusion, sort of. I didn't feel like I was a very like worthwhile person in general. And one of the person in group said that, like, well, looking at you from the outside, you seem perfect, and that just like blew my mind. Right? I don't feel like that at all. And so I wonder, if someone was to look at you, I mean, you seem like a healthy young guy, who's like, got like a sharp mind, who's like studying, this thing that he's really passionate about. You might even say like, oh, here's someone who knows what they're doing, right? Who's kind of like, you've like generally got your metaphysics in order, right? Like, that like atheism is clearly correct, and you're like kind of having fun with the ideas. But generally, like, you like know yourself pretty well. That, I mean, I'm just saying that might be like a perception of you from the outside, right? And you know I think it's Nietzsche who says that, sometimes that desire for certainty, which might manifest itself truly as, this is what I believe and I stand by it. The If you look underneath that, that might actually be a sense of fear of like clinging to something, right? Because, yeah, I don't know if you have some thoughts on that.
Hmm. I mean, I guess to take another person in my life, my grandfather that I mentioned earlier. I told him to his face, and he didn't deny it. He didn't affirm it either, but he didn't deny it in such a way that I thought I was right. He was like, I told him I thought he was a closet atheist. He just kind of like nodded, and he was like that, and he just said something about like he or maybe I told him that I told my great aunt that I thought he was a closet atheist or something. I don't remember. And I think my grandfather said something about like, well, yeah, I don't want to like talk about, religion to your great aunt because I don't want to hurt her feelings or something like that. Um, but my grandfather also like, is a fairly steady churchgoer. Um, so it's like, here's this man who, again, I'm convinced doesn't believe really a lick of Christian theology. Um, and he's also sort of a loner and someone who he's a retired professor of French language and literature. So he's also interested in like ideas and books. Um, but he's like still going to church fairly regularly. And like still like would come to the defense of religion whenever I like was critical of it in conversation with him. Um, so it's people's relationship with organized religion and religious belief is very interesting to me. And I guess I'm like thinking about it a bit more because I'm like no longer in my edgy atheist phase. I'm no longer like I'm because when I was a teenager, it was like um I was like more willing to be like to people like to be like, oh, you're wrong to people's faces. Like that's a myth. And it's like it's not very helpful. It doesn't really put me in it doesn't necessarily put you in good graces with the people you're talking to. Because again, you're breaking that like code of like, oh, don't talk about religion because you don't want to offend anybody. That's particularly true in the US. Um, so I'm like, I guess my opinion on religion is maybe evolving some. Um, a little it's more I don't think it was my opinion was ever like very simple, but it was probably more simplistic like when I was a teenage and it was more simplistic when I was an edgy teenage atheist than it is now when I'm 22 and sort of reflecting on um uh I guess the kind of life I want to lead or what is worthwhile in life. Um I'm very scared that like in a 5-10 years I'm gonna become like Jordan Peterson. Because the people I dislike the most, I think, are the people I agree with the most. And so I'm like violently reacting against Jordan Peterson in rage because I'm so like close to. I might be like subconsciously so close to his mindset, and so I'm like, no, get away from me! I gotta expel. The power of Christ compels you. Just gotta expel his influence from my psyche.
Yeah, yeah. That like Peterson attacks atheism specifically because he's pretty atheistic in his worldview. If you really look at the way he analyzes the Bible, right? Um,
Yes. Well, I think the best thing for Jordan Peterson would be to go into like a monastic seclusion for a few years to see God in during this time and then come out as a true believer. That's like I think that would be the best thing for him for his life and career. Because I do sense and this kind of gets back to your point earlier about I guess the difference between external um, perception and like your internal experience. Because he does really strike me as someone who doesn't believe but desperately wants to believe. He thinks that religion has a strong social utility. He's very scared of what he sees as the cultural relativism in our world today. And so he thinks that Christianity is a bedrock for the moral code that he thinks people should follow. Um, but I guess what sort of, you know, annoys me about Jordan Peterson is uh, that cognitive dissonance, because he's in his lectures and interviews, he is so like on the defense of Christianity, but because it doesn't feel genuine, because his words often don't feel genuine to me, I just end up feeling like, he's trying to hoodwink me. He's trying to like, fool me somehow. Because it's like whenever I might have said this on another podcast or something before, but whenever he's asked like, "Do you believe in God?" he goes into like a 20-minute spiel where like, well, what do you mean by God? Like, and I guess theologians might jump in and be like, well, that's a genuine question. Why are you why are you criticizing Peterson for that? And I'm like, I guess I'm criticizing him for that because I think most people sort of are able to at least comprehend what you mean when you say, do you believe in God? And so I think it is a bit more of a simple question than Peterson lets on, but I think he makes it complex because he doesn't really believe in like the way that an evangelical Christian believes. And so, but he doesn't want to say, "Oh, I'm an atheist," because I think he thinks that would like undermine his like, you know, his identity as a defender of Christianity. So he's sort of gambling. He's playing a game, and I feel like he's losing.
I mean, I can sort of sympathize with his conundrum because, I mean, I'm an atheist in that very practical sense, right? Because in that, some people genuinely seem to believe that like there is a personal deity who will like judge and reward you based on your behavior, and like you'll end up in like an eternal place of reward or punishment, and that like this deity like actually runs the world and stuff like that. Like I think there might be some people who genuinely believe that, but then if I call myself an atheist, it's like I'm saying like that I'm lacking this organizing principle, that I don't really believe in almost like let's call it the sanctity of life or like the divinity of human beings. Like there's so many things that are sort of like ancillary to the idea of God, that like once you jettison the general idea, it's almost like you're like casting yourself out of society. And like Daniel Dennett has this idea that most people actually believe in the belief in God. Like they don't actually think there's like a personal deity running the world. Most people are too scientifically literate for that, but they think it's a good idea to believe in something like that, right? Almost to like buy in to the like not illusion, but let's say like symbolic value of something like God. And which is why I think some people are afraid of atheists, because they're like, oh, these people, they could do anything, right? I've heard that before. It's like, well, you're an atheist. How do you have any sort of moral compass, right? Like I've heard Dennis Prager say something like, well, if I didn't believe in God, I'd be out like raping and killing. And I'm like, holy crap. Like it's like, I'm glad that he believes it, right? Because if that's the only thing stopping him, right? Like this, vague, abstract, like constellation of thought patterns, if that's all that's stopping him from like, being a menace, then, great, right? But like it's strange to me how there's nothing for an atheist to affirm. And an extra irony is that Christians were originally called atheists because they were so obsessed with like the cognitive aspects of belief rather than participating in like the ritual of belief, where it's like, well, you could believe whatever, but you go through the ritual because that's the social thing. And then now it's kind of flipped where you could have someone like Peterson who like genuinely cares about the Bible and studies it, word by word, going through like, an hour lecture, just expounding on one paragraph. So that's like the cognitive aspect of belief. Whereas like the Christian aspect of belief now is more about ritual. So it's like this strange flip. And like for me, if you were to ask me about like a life affirmation, like what is my God, I go to something like Nietzsche, like his ideas in Zarathustra, where he, as far as I can tell, he tries to like establish his own religion. And yeah, like I wonder how you think of yourself as like what is your affirmative belief? Like you might say you're a philosopher, but you could be, I don't know, like you could adore, I don't know, some like crazy like Nazi philosopher or something, or like Kant, right? So it well, I guess you could say there's the ambiguity and incoherence with any sort of faith, right? You could believe whatever if you're a Christian, but yeah, like I wonder how you would answer that question. Like, do you believe in God? Would you just say no, I'm an atheist and leave it at that, or would you qualify that term of atheism?
So I think I've probably come to the position that what's the term? Is it agnosticism? Whereas like a theological non-cognitivist. So I just threw out jargon there, so I sound so super smart and cool. But um,
Theological.
like I don't think the word God means anything. I guess I can't make heads or tails really of the word God. I know what a lot of people at least in the God of the Bible is supposed to be a being that created the universe, and we have the picture of like a an old white man in the sky, um, uh, 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 and it's gonna sound so blasphemous, but when I thought of like when I had a little kid, when I was a little kid, and I thought of God, the image that came up to me was Gollum.
Like
so
Lord of
so
the Rings, the creature.
yes, I don't know why. That was just an association I had in my mind when I was like really really young, because I love Lord of the Rings. But so I
Like this weird cave creature. I love that.
um because I couldn't like think of I just didn't think of him as like I guess an old man. So I was like, well, he can't really he's not a human, is he? So he's like something else, and like I don't know. I'm not going to try to justify my little kid opinions, but um so I guess like where I would differ from Jordan Peterson, like our fundamental distinction is um like I said, he he really wants to believe um deep down. And I guess even though as I said earlier, I've experienced in my lifetimes when I did want to believe, but ultimately I don't, I guess, or ultimately I'm not willing to go down that path. Um I brought up Sigmund Freud again. Um and what I like about Freud is um he at least wanted to create a space for rationality. Even though he acknowledged, we're governed by unconscious impulses and desires, and we're very like irrational in our nature. Um, we can still, to one degree or another, use our reason, use a logical argument um, to uh, to sidestep the excesses of irrationality and to um, create something um, to create lives that I guess make more sense, and to create lives that minimize the illusions. And I guess that's sort of my thing that um, the hill I'll die on. It's I want to minimize the illusions. Like there's this great quote by Gramsci. Um, he says the point of modernity is to live a life without illusions while not becoming disillusioned. Um, and I guess I would just add the caveat that, like I said, I don't think you can entirely live without illusions. I don't think I am. I don't think human beings are capable of living without any illusions. But I think the thing about illusions is we don't have to know they're illusions, right? So if you ask me what are your illusions, it's like heck if I know. Other people could probably tell you, but I don't think I could. Because then if I thought they were illusions, I probably wouldn't believe them. Um, but I still hold to like the idea that the scientific method is probably the best tool we have for understanding the natural world. I still hold that um, philosophy, um, which is synonymous, I guess, in my mind with like rational argument, it is a, you know, an important pursuit, and that truth or reality are, still worthwhile concepts to some degree. Um, Even if we don't have ultimate knowledge or like capital T truth. Um, and I guess I'll add one more point, which is sometimes like it's okay to um, turn off your rationality. So if I'm watching a movie and I need to suspend disbelief, it's like I'm not going to necessarily sit there and be like, oh, flying cars don't exist. Oh, I can't watch this anymore. Like, oh, magic isn't real. I can't watch this anymore. It's like, no, I mean, I can enjoy the movie even though it's fictional. So, or I can enjoy music and poetry and art, and narrative and storytelling and symbolism. Um, but I always, retain in the back of my mind the recognition this isn't true, at least in the way I understand truth. Or it's not true about the universe. It might be true about human consciousness or the human experience to some degree, but it's not true in the sense that 2 + 2 = 4 is true, or in the sense that the Earth revolves around the sun is true. Um,
But that's a tricky one, right? Because I find that even though I like to think of myself as someone who can, let's say, like see through the charade of a movie I watch, right? Like I know that these are actors. I know that there's cameras, there's editors, whatever. Like I know all that intellectually, but the story will just like hit me on like a level below that, like rational level of thinking, and like it will resonate. Like okay, well, like what they're trying to say, like that does seem to be how life is, right? And the thing is that it might be wrong. Like it might just be like very convincing emotionally, um, and it might seem true, right? But then it might be like an odd way to frame it. So for example, you know, there's like such beautiful love stories in movies, and I think it's not. I think it's common for people to experience the sorts of things that you might see in a movie, but then because the dark side of love isn't represented as much, or like let's say the mundane or boring parts of love aren't presented. You don't see people arguing about, you know, who,
who did the dishes last night?
exactly, yeah, like these kinds of weird domestic disputes like spread over years and years and years and years. You can't really get that from even a really long series, right? So it's like it kind of distorts like what importance you weigh, like what kind of weight you put on certain things. Um, but then again, like I totally agree with what you said about like valuing the scientific method and truth and reality, like whatever those concepts mean. I think they do refer to something, and I totally value that. But then when it comes to like what to value and how to value it, it seems tricky, right? Because well, maybe it's not. Maybe you could just have like a scientifically oriented thing of like, well, I want to feel good, I want to be happy, I want to, maximize certain physiological things. Like I wonder, if in your philosophy classes, if biology and physiology and anatomy play a role in like the way you frame um, ideas.
uh, Not explicitly in the curriculum, but in our discussions, some of these concepts have come up. Yes. Um, in fact, there's a class which I haven't taken at my school, but it's about sort of the brain and consciousness, and it's team taught by a philosopher and a computer scientist. I think I hope to take that class at some point before I graduate, but um, I think there should be more interdisciplinary uh, communication. And in fact, I do think biology is. In fact, I was having this conversation with Carl Nord a while back. biology is very important for a philosopher, which is why I've studied a good deal of biology on my own, like evolutionary biology. There's even a time when I considered going into that as a career. Um, and like when I was, a little kid, I was like really interested in like collecting insects and like just understanding the natural world, learning about dinosaurs. All kids love learning about dinosaurs, um, and really just savoring the natural world. Um, savoring like the information and the beauty that is in the natural world. So um, I like to think that I sort of can have like I have like the soul of a scientist or at some level, even though my interest and inclination nowadays is more abstract and philosophical. Um,
But so you mentioned earlier something about how you were kind of born the way you are, right? Like you just have these inclinations of just like questioning a lot of things. And you know I I was like blown away by some research that showed that the size of your bicep has some correlation to like how willing you are to engage, or how willing you are to um, put forward military intervention as a political goal, right? And you can sort of see it, right? It's like the bigger and stronger you are, the more willing you are to have political views that emphasize military aggression and conflict and stuff like that. And so I wonder, like, if you've seen any kind of link between your personal proclivities in terms like your ideological proclivities and your body, right? Or so another things like, for example, I want to say I'm hypoglycemic. I don't know if that's accurate, but basically, like, if I don't eat within like a certain portion of time, my mood and my ability to be around other people like is like crashes along with that. So I'm like, wait a minute, what if my like willingness to be in solitude is really like a matter of like how I process glucose? You know what I mean? um, yeah, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
so for the longest time, I think and I think some psychologists have done studies on this. Like little kids are basically dualists. Little kids sort of have this experience of like they aren't bodies, they have bodies, and they're looking like whoever they are is like in here somewhere, and they're like looking through their eyes in the world to the world around us. And so I think I like wasn't until like maybe in the last few years or so that I began to think of myself as being a body and not having a body, and taking care of like getting more exercise, eating eating better foods. um I mean, I'm sure there's been a uh well, here I guess here's an example. Like I've often wondered if I mean, because little kids don't often take the best care of themselves, right? Or they don't eat the best food. Like that happens. It's natural. Um, but sometimes I wonder if like me not taking care of my body as well when I was a little younger, like might have predisposed me to depression. There's like because you hear like that there's like can be connection between like your brain up here, then your enteric is it enteric nervous system or your gut? I think I might have said that wrong, but your gut brain.
Interrogate, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
okay. Like I wonder if like because I ate a lot of like junk food as a kid, and so I've asked
Same here.
myself, did all like my junk food as a kid like sort of ruin my gut biome, and that like somehow has predisposed me to be a little more like anxious um and prone to maybe sadness or depression. Um, and then of course I've never been like the most masculine um guy out there. I've never really been that into sports. um I go to the gym sometimes, but not maybe not as often as I should. And I'm not that concerned about getting swole. um and so I guess I've been more inclined to just, read books and do other do more mental activities rather than physical activities. Um, but again, like as I get older, I'm, becoming um more I'm taking care of my body more, and I'm like trying to become more physically active as a way of like um getting away from my mind, getting away from all that mental activity, and just like doing something more with my hands, or going out in the woods. Like I love hiking. One of my favorite activities. I don't do enough of it. I feel so at peace and um whole and happy and healthy when I'm like just lost in the woods somewhere, hearing the birds chirp and seeing squirrels scurry about, and um, looking at the trees that are been there for generations, that were there generations before me and will probably be there after I'm dead and gone. Um, so I guess that's my answer to your question.
Yeah, fair thing. And I mean, yeah, I like I think about all the times I spent like growing up, just like on the computer, hour after hour, like not going out in the sun, not like exercising, stuff like that. And I mean, I was like sturdy enough to kind of get through it fine, but yeah, like I wonder about all the different ways it's like warped me. But I mean, I don't know how you feel about the idea of like embracing your fate, you know, because like obviously there's value in just being like, well, everything that um like foreign me is part of who I am, might as well just accept it. But then it's like without regrets, you're not going to be able to um like make better decisions in the future, I guess. Anyway, um we're coming up past the hour here, but yeah, is there anything else you want to a plug or something you're working on that people should be on the lookout for?
Um, Not at this time. I haven't really been uploading recently. I've just been so busy with classes and a lot of personal stuff that but I do hope to upload more podcasts and videos in the near future. I love one positive side of the internet is I do get to have these interesting conversations with like-minded people that I don't always get to have on a daily basis, even with some of my classmates. Um, so I appreciate you inviting me on. I had a great time, and hope to do it again soon.
Cool. Thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate you taking the time, and all the best becoming a. I wish you all the best in your journey on becoming a better philosopher, or growing as a philosopher. Yeah, thanks a
You
lot,
as
man.
well.
Thanks for watching or listening, and smash that like and subscribe, because if you don't, I will cry.